Hello, my name is Denise Lindeman, and I'm one of the members here at Desert Grace. I'm excited to share this Sunday message with you. Would you take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel? And if you like this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up so that we know you've been blessed. You can do those things below.
Y'all ready for a revolution? Woohoo! And we didn't even talk about what yet. There's a difference between an uprising and a revolution, and we kind of got to talk about that a little bit. It's not uncommon for an uprising to occur, and sometimes uprisings are smaller scale, sometimes they are a bit larger in scale, but it's not uncommon for them to occur. And really, it comes down to something maybe a little bit like this. Once in a while, there's a small-scale uprising involving some children that I know. They occasionally protest their living conditions or the horrible food that they have been served or whatever else, and there's a bit of an uprising and maybe protests involved. Some of them are a little bit larger. I read about a civics class in Chicago's Roosevelt High School. Back in the fall of 2015, they were really upset because the city schools there in Chicago had given a contract to Aramark. And Aramark is a really big corporation that provides food services and janitorial services. One of their biggest businesses is prisons, and they also do schools. And so the kids were like, hey, these are like prison food being served in the school, and it needed to be upgraded. So they talked to their civics professor, teacher, convinced them that they could go about trying to change the world by starting a movement, in which they did. And eventually the movement got national attention. It was beyond just local, and it went on and on and on, and they had pictures of some pretty gross-looking food that if it was served to me, I would probably begin an uprising as well. But it was a serious sort of thing. In the end, though, while they had gotten national attention and everything else, I really don't know how the resolution finally ended up. I was able to find out, because their website's still active, that they had made some progress, including getting some of their cafeteria remodeled, and really important here, the cafeteria could again sell slushies. But after about the end of that class, probably, the website never gets updated again. I did look up in Chicago City Schools, the Chicago Public Schools, which has over 300,000 students, still uses Aramark. So I guess they didn't quite get, unless there's an Aramark gourmet division, they probably didn't get everything they wanted. Merriam-Webster notes that an uprising is, and this is the dictionary definition, an act or incidence of rising up. Yeah. It's especially a local act in defiance of an established government system. Typically, that would be what we would call an uprising. While an uprising might help for at least a moment, major change really only comes via a revolution. An uprising is going to make a small change for a small period of time, but a revolution is going to be a sudden and extreme change. My guess is that when I said the word revolutions, some of them came to your mind, and some of the ones that came to your mind immediately involved some violence, some wars, some serious hand-to-hand combat or deaths, and yet they aren't the only kind of revolutions. There's the Industrial Revolution, for example. It's not necessarily something that has to be fought in a war. But Merriam-Webster describes a revolution as sudden, radical, or complete change. Where at one point it was this, and all of a sudden there's this incredible change that makes a difference. And while it can be a government, we already sort of talked about this, it can be a paradigm shift or a change in preferences. The way some people think. Over the next month or so, we're going to talk about church revolution. What could that possibly mean? I promise you we're not planning to go take over another church and steal all their people. Although at this time with nobody in the building, it'd be a good time to start. Unprotected buildings, we'll just move in. I don't know. But we're not going to do that. We're going to sort of talk through what exactly does this mean? And we're going to answer this question today. What makes an uprising for Jesus far less than a revolution for the cause of Christ? Because it's possible for us to merely be involved in an uprising, something that is not exactly the long-term result that we want, when I'm pretty convinced that Jesus came not so that there would be a minor uprising, but that there would be a complete revolution. And I'm worried that sometimes in the church we have missed this point altogether, where we begin to talk more about an uprising, maybe about the government or maybe about something else that's going on in our world, when all that does is put us back into the same place as the Pharisees of so many years ago, who when Jesus came on the scene missed it because they were more interested in an uprising than a revolution. The story we're going to look at today comes from John chapter 6. It's probably, if you've been in the church for very long, one you've heard at least once in your past lifetime. And it appears in all four Gospels. It's one of the few stories that's in all four. When you think about that, that's kind of incredible because even the birth of Jesus isn't quite in all four. And so this one appears all four times. It's John 6, verses 1 through 15. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "You think McDonald's over there can handle all of this? Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have just one bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go when there's so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Now, those last 2 verses are really important. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." In John 6:15, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Think about the response to what they have seen. There's no question that when you hear this story, when you see what happens, that this is not a natural occurring event. This was not an organized church picnic, an organized potluck, an organized anything else. This was Jesus saying, "Watch what God can do. Watch what God can make occur." This is the sort of event that we cannot simply say, listen, this was something that was absolutely going to happen. We can only say that this is a miracle. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I want to give you sort of some scenes here in which the miracle unfolds. And the first one seems rather simplistic. Jesus sits. And now I point this out for a very important reason. He's going to make everyone else sit in a little while. But Jesus sits down. He sits with his disciples. He is enjoying sitting with his disciples, I would guess, when he looks up and sees the crowd. We'll get to that point in just a second. But the fact that Jesus is sitting, we're never told that he's standing and preaching like I am right now. He's not in the midst of something really serious. It's said that the disciples had crossed over the Sea of Galilee to go to the other side. Now, it doesn't tell us which side they were on to begin with. We can have some ideas there. But that's not even important. My guess is that after some time and you've walked or gone across the sea and you get to the other side and you gather together, you're ready for a snack. Some of you are always ready for a snack. But they were ready for a snack. They go up on the mountainside, and I get the impression that occasionally I will hike up. We try to do it at least once a week. We hike up to the top of Telegraph Pass with the kids. And I'm thinking that this is not quite that sort of mountainside, where you have to go up, because if you have 5,000 people who are coming after you, there's not grassy room for them to sit. I'm not really sure. So in my imagination, I have to envision a big area where the mountain is not so steep, quite that way. Throughout this story so far, we have absolutely no dialogue. There's no description of any conversation. So it's not like we are kind of given in. Now, as they went up the mountainside, Jesus talked about how this or that would be. How God always provides. That would be a good thing, right? If God always provides, now we provide food for everybody. There's this great lesson in there. But we aren't even given that. It might even be that they were just enjoying the walk. Have you ever just been enjoying the walk? Maybe with some close friends, family members. Some people that live in my house have to talk all the time. I won't mention any names, Lucas. Oh. So they're sitting on the mountainside. We don't know what they're speaking of or what they're talking about. And then Jesus sees. It doesn't say that Jesus sort of glanced up, and it doesn't say that he was afraid. It doesn't say that he was concerned. He sees that this great crowd is approaching. Apparently, they did not have pitchforks and torches. They looked like a friendly crowd, because Jesus' first thought is, we should feed them. Kind of an interesting thought. First thought. They may have been people who had walked around. They may have come across, the people might have walked around. So they might have been just as tired and hungry as the disciples would have been. Definitely ready for a snack. And Jesus says, we should do something, right? The crowd is there, by the way, because they are interested in seeing the next miracle. When you think about the miracles that John has presented us to this point, John is really specific. He wants us to see these as signs as to who Jesus is. So you begin with water into wine. Then you have the man who's healed at the pool. You have the woman at the well who has probably one of the greatest healings, even though it's not physical. They've been seeing these miracles. They've been hearing the stories of Jesus. And by the way, there's a bunch I've left out. There's a bunch that John left out. He wrote. So they are following along, waiting to see what Jesus is going to do next. Little do they know they'll be a part of the next miracle. Jesus isn't ever recorded as having taught while he was up there. You never see Jesus stand and say, all right, if you will listen to my sermon, my friend Philip will take you all to McDonald's. You get an ice cream cone after, if the machine is working. But Jesus has a lesson in mind that he's going to teach through the very event. The third thing Jesus does is he gives a little test. So he sits with his disciples. He sees a great crowd coming, and now it's time for a test. We've already read about it. He chooses Philip, and my guess is Jesus had one of those little kind of smiles, those knowing smiles that you get when you ask a question that you know what the answer is going to come across as. Hey, Philip, where do you think we should buy some food for them? Now, some of you immediately would freak out if somebody says, look, there's 5,000 people coming, go get some food. Do you know how much time it takes to prepare to serve 5,000 people? Now, 5,000 people eat every day, so long as we have that clear. There's enough food in Yuma for 5,000 people to eat, plus a whole bunch of 100,000s, right? Toilet paper, different story. Food. Food. And Philip's sitting there going, Jesus, if you wanted to have a potluck, this needed to be put in the church bulletin. It needed to be, we have to order the chicken in advance, and we got to have all the, where do you just go buy enough bread for 5,000 people overnight? Like now. I got to tell you, at my house, a loaf of bread lasts one meal. And that's not anywhere near 5,000. I want to tell you the truth. I am just like Philip. If Jesus looked at me and said, all right, go buy food for them, I would be like, Jesus, do you know how much that would cost? If you want to do this, let's put it on the calendar and plan for it. And because it's going to be really hard to do it right now. It's difficult in normal, good times to go find enough food for 5,000 men. I mean, one peanut butter and jelly sandwich, they'll be through that before we're to number 2. And so if we're going to give everybody just one peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and there's at least 5,000 men there, you realize how many slices of bread that is, right? Do you realize how much peanut butter that is? How much jelly? And if you're going to go crazy and add like bananas and honey, you need a food truck like Aramark or somebody needs to come out and plan that. And this is an extravagant thing to even begin to suggest, Jesus. What are you thinking? Are you not sure this would take half a year's salary for an average person just for everybody to take one bite? And some people would take a bigger bite than others. You ever share an ice cream cone with somebody? Only if you can take the bigger bite. See, Philip is looking around and he's saying, Lord, what you're asking, we're not prepared for that. And there's no way, and this sort of annoying smirk that Jesus had on his face because he already knew what he was going to do. He already knew how this was going to come out. Andrew comes to Philip's rescue. And Andrew says, hey, this kid, he's got the poor man's bread and a couple of fish. Probably little, weed might have thrown him back. But he's got that. What are you going to do with that? Like, that's probably not enough to feed us 12. Jesus says, oh, no worries. Have everybody sit down. I always find it kind of interesting because the scripture says everybody who was seated was given food. I wondered if there were some people who were like, I don't want to sit down. And they're like, no food for you. Fourth thing that Jesus does is he takes. I don't mean takes like he snatches the fish and the bread and says, all right, now it's mine. But he takes, because this is that language that we are so familiar with, where Jesus takes the bread. He gives thanks for it. If you tuned in last week, you might remember this. He gives thanks for it, and then he distributes it. And this is language that appears in Jesus' pattern of living, where he is the one who is able to make the food, give thanks for it, and make it last for an entire community. And when you begin to think about this sort of language, you see exactly what Jesus is doing. He does it with the bread, then he does it with the fish. And I always have wondered how the fish and the bread lasted so long, because, you almost get it. There's I think a couple of movie scenes where he holds it up to give thanks, and when he brings it back down, it's just heaped over, which, by the way, is still not enough food for 5,000 people. How? Now, my mind is all stuck in that. Exactly how does this occur? How exactly? Hey, give me the mechanics. I'd like to know how Jesus did this. It could make the next church potluck work. We're so much better off. Although I got to tell you, sometimes you don't have to wonder how Jesus did it when you get the church potlucks. Somehow, half the time, it seems to me like there's way more food than was ever brought. And it's amazing, because sometimes people must not like their food very much because they just leave it when they leave. That's why you end up with so many stray crock pots and dishes after a potluck. So Jesus does this. Everyone received as much as they wanted. Now, this is one thing that is different, I think, than what we would normally say. We would probably say something like this: everybody got what they needed. So I don't know about you, but sometimes the difference between what I want and the difference between what I need is actually a pretty big difference. That I really only need a certain amount of bread and fish, but sometimes when I'm eating it, it tastes so good that I want much more. And while it doesn't say that Jesus took the time to cook the fish, it makes me wonder, was this some of the best fish that they ate that they wanted way more than they would have needed? Kind of a question to think about, I guess. When all was said and done, there were some leftovers, 12 basketfuls. So you take a couple of loaves, a couple of fish and 5 loaves, and end up with way more left over? Begin to make you wonder. Without ever saying a word, Jesus taught those gathered about himself. Without getting up to preach a long sermon, which nobody would have been listening to because they were busy enjoying a meal, Jesus taught them a lot about who he was, from where he came, and what he is capable of doing. That there would be no question at this point as to Jesus is the prophet. He is the Messiah. He is the one who's to come. This person has God on his side no matter what. Look at all the miracles that he's done, and we came to watch him do the next one, and little did we know we would be beneficiaries. And he teaches us who he is. The lesson, honestly, should have been about his identity as the Messiah. They should have seen instantly that we should listen to what he has to say to us about what he wants to do. We should be paying attention to what he is doing and what he is saying and hear that out. Even those who were trying to listen closely missed most of it. That's why we get to the resurrection and still go, what? Are you kidding? The grave is empty? How'd that happen? Oh, wait, Jesus said this was going to occur. Should have been about it. You see, Jesus is the Messiah. He comes from heaven. He is God's Son. He will give his life. John started off his gospel and talking a little bit about this. The crowd, though, doesn't see a Messiah. They see a politician who would make for a great governor. If Jesus is able to turn water into wine, if he is able to heal people who have been crippled, if he is able to heal a relationship not only with just a woman and herself, but with a woman and an entire community, and if he's able to produce enough food, think about it, if you can feed the people, you can govern them easily. And that's what they begin to see. They say things like, yep, he's the prophet. And Jesus says, I got to get out of here because in as much as I can see what they're planning, I can see that they want to take me and make me king by force. An uprising, not a revolution. To see him as more than a king prophet, than a Messiah Savior is their big flaw here. God has done something incredible through Jesus, and they are still stuck on, we live in an oppressed government. I'm worried that sounds a little familiar to some of us. The crowd is ready to follow Jesus as an uprising, rather than to wait for the revolution that Jesus already knows is taking place. I think most uprisings want to be a revolution, but they either fail to succeed or succeed only temporarily. Think of the group of civic students who wanted to revolutionize school lunch. It's funny, sort of, to look at the website because in some of their requests, they're sort of knocking them down and saying, you kids do things that live within what the government wants. If I had been at the time, I probably would have said, and as much as you should research that, what you ought to do is expand it so that you're not just changing things for Chicago public schools, you're changing things for the nation. There might be some things in the Healthy Kids Act that don't belong. So in the end, I guess I don't know if they succeeded or not. For the crowd, the desire to follow Jesus was one of both politics and religion. Jesus must be from God, and that makes him the right leader for us here. They miss it. They miss it. If we're not careful, we will miss what Jesus is trying to say to us. We will miss what he really came to do, and it will become more of a mechanical sort of act of we want Jesus and this and that. And we want him to be the king and to be our ruler. Because we look around and we see our options for kings and see how far short they fall from what we think God would want. With the miracles that Jesus is performing, they are convinced that he would also be able to press his kingdom. Because remember, Jesus talked a lot about his kingdom. Remember that if you are a Christ follower, you are a dual citizen already. Because there is a kingdom of heaven that's already here now, even though it's not fully here. They missed that part. Maybe Jesus should have taught them while he was feeding them. I don't know. I think the problem is one of a quick fix Christianity. I think it's one of quick fix Christianity, where we want Jesus to come in, make everything all better, and as soon as it's all better, it's like, well, what have you done for me lately, Jesus? Seems like all you ever do is want, want, want. You want me to tell other people about you. You want me to give money. You want me to volunteer my time at the church. You want me to do this. You want me to do that. What have you done for me lately? Yeah, I haven't. Well, you promised me heaven a long time ago. Got my card right here in my wallet. Ticket to heaven. You see, the crowd is seeing Jesus as an immediate and perhaps a short-term solution to their issues. I want you to remember something. Kings and prophets, they tend to only be for a season. Kings will die. Prophets die. It's only for a season. So had Jesus been forced into being king, it would have been a very temporary, immediate, short-term solution. Even though he didn't die, that's a whole other story. He died anyway. Gets confusing to talk about. I think the problem is that had Jesus become king on earth, while they would have been more comfortable, they wouldn't have been any closer to God. And I think sometimes that's what we're asking. We're asking God, would you please come closer to me so that I can be more comfortable, but that don't ask any more of me, really. See, the problem for us, I think, sometimes is one of motives. That we begin to look around and we begin to want the right thing for the wrong reason. Or want the wrong thing for the right reason. The crowd is seeing Jesus and they are following him in great numbers. Jesus says, I look and I see a great crowd coming. Right now, that's about 4,980 people more than are following in this building. I know, a lot of people online, millions probably. Hi, Mom and Dad. You see, you get this great crowd following, but they're only following to see the miracles and try to force their political end. The real motive to follow Jesus really ought to rest on obedience. The motive is God. The motive should not be us. My fear is that too often our motive to follow Jesus rests on what he can do for us and not what we can do for him. And we need to be careful about that. Today's church should be focused on Jesus' revolution rather than trying to start an uprising. Jesus came for some incredible things, and it needs to be less about us, more about him, so that we will be focused on the right things, that our motives will be in the right place, that we will never get confused about what we ought to be doing. Because we'll be doing the right things for the right reasons. So we find ourselves back at the same question we started with. What makes an uprising for Jesus far less than a revolution for the cause of Christ? I'll give you 3 key points and a couple of little points underneath. An uprising is about the mind, while a revolution is about the heart. An uprising deals with what's in my brain, with my logic, with what makes sense to me. Whereas a revolution is going to deal with what's in my heart and what I really want to see happen. That has some implications for us as a church. A church uprising thinks it makes a difference through its own strength, as opposed to the strength of what Jesus can do. A church uprising only lasts as long as Jesus satisfies those who call themselves Christ followers. If you need evidence of this, look at how many people go to a church for a period of time and then head off to another church. This one doesn't fit anymore. Doesn't scratch me where I want to be itched. I mean, they're always asking for money. There's always one more need. They're always begging me to be a part of children's ministry, youth ministry. Not enough potlucks, too much asking. So we move on. We said this one already. I realized they were out of order. But the church uprising thinks it makes a difference through its own strength. And let me tell you something. If you were to look even at our church, based on our numbers, it's amazing what we do. And we don't do it because we're so great. We do it because Christ is at the center. A church uprising looks for a payoff before moving any further. Kind of talked about that before. Jesus, what have you done for me? All right, I'll get a little more faithful, if you will. Or I would give more money to the church, but I first want to know. We should be going further, knowing that the payoff isn't ours to determine. We should go further, knowing that when we give to God, God makes it so much greater than it ever could have been before. A church revolution trusts its leader with everything in them. If you're at home and this isn't on the screen, leader is capitalized. It's not me. I am not the leader of this revolution. The leader is Jesus. Which means that as your pastor, I must trust the leader. As the church board, you must trust the leader. As a congregation, you must trust the leader. So easy to trust the leader. Church revolution knows that it only makes a difference in Jesus' strength. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This isn't something we can do on our own. A church revolution wants Jesus to get the glory. We're not looking for us to get it. You know, if tomorrow Desert Grace was in a position where people said this is a place of hope, and it began to grow and get bigger and bigger, and people were coming and getting saved every day of the week, it wouldn't be about us because we can't make that happen. It would be about God who gets all the glory. Is your heart open to this? Is your mind open to this? Are you more interested in participating in an uprising, or are you more interested in participating in a revolution? Which one is yours? Second thing I would say is an uprising is about the temporary, while the revolution is about eternal. An uprising is about this moment. A revolution will change the world for all eternity. Whether people like it or not, Jesus' very presence on this planet has changed the world forever. A church uprising looks toward the emotional to sort of fire up the troops. We're guilty of this sometimes in the church. We sort of look towards the emotional past and go, all right, remember when things were so good? We want to get back to that. And the way to do that is if we will do this, and let's go team. And then some people who maybe weren't wanting to be a part before now want to be part. Maybe some people who before were like, oh yes, I remember those days. They were great. How do we get back there again? A church uprising does the same things, the same ways, and hopes for different results. And we all know that that is the definition of perfection. Insanity. Perfection because we are really good at getting it wrong. You see, we think in terms of, what can we do politically? What can we do this way? What can we do that way? We got to think outside the box. A church uprising is forgotten when the next great church thing comes along. You ever been a part of a church like that? Well, this church over there, they're doing this. We should do that too. Let's do it. And then you start and you don't do it as well as the church over there. And it doesn't work out so well for you. And so then you go look and you see what another church is doing. All right, let's do it. That's a whole bunch of little uprisings. You never get to the revolution. A church revolution has troops on the front line that actually want to be there. Now, this is where you can ask yourself, am I part of an uprising or a revolution? Am I actively trying to seek out the best, what God is calling me to do, and am I doing it willingly? I know I'm sort of starting to butt in, meddling a little. But this is an important thing for us to recognize, because if we find ourselves, all right, I guess I got to go witness because that's what the church says I ought to do. Do you know about Jesus Christ? No? Okay, thanks for telling. Let me tell you about my good friend Jesus. He is the whole life to me. You should follow him too. I'm so excited to be here telling you about Jesus. You think anyone's getting saved that way? On the contrary, you that are the best at being on the front line evangelism, you're the ones that are just always so excited and happy. And you see somebody at the grocery store and they look sad and you're like, why are you so sad? And they're like, why are you so happy? And you're like, I got Jesus in my life. And they're like, well, I want some. Amen. You want to be on the front lines. Some of us are a little less on the evangelism, let's be on the front lines, but we're in the front lines a different way. And happy to be here. Oh, we need to move tables? Great. Woohoo! Move some tables for Christ. Need to write a birthday card? Great! Write some birthday cards for Christ. I guess maybe part of what I'm trying to say here is that when you want to be there, a church that's really in the midst of a revolution, people are excited about ministry. A church revolution is going to follow God's lead in trying new things to watch Jesus bring the results. How do we think outside the box? What should we be doing next as a church to reach people for Christ? Let's do this. Let's ask Jesus what he wants. And when Jesus tells us, let's give it a try. And then if it doesn't work, we go, well, we must not have been listening very well. Because it's Jesus who brings the results. And sometimes what we really need to do is stop and go, we should change the way we are seeing and measuring results. Because sometimes we think, if we do this, what should happen is this. And Jesus says, no, if you do this, I will do my part, and you will have done yours. I better not talk about that too much. A church revolution isn't a program. A church revolution is movement toward God. Where do you see yourself in these statements? Would you still say you're part of a revolution or part of an uprising? An uprising is time-consuming, while a revolution is life-consuming. One is going to take a lot of time. The other is going to take everything that you are. Hopefully nobody's checking out right now online. He's getting too serious now. Click. An uprising is going to take an investment of time. People are eventually going to drop out. because it's dependent on the immediate short-term result. And when that doesn't seem like it's going to be possible, what do? Give up. Move on. The reality is, I thought about this with the kids doing the revolution of school lunches, and the reality is that the class would end, but the project, if they were really serious about it, would go on probably beyond their graduation date. You're not going to change school lunches in a semester. Maybe not even in a year. And eventually people are going to be like, yeah, you know what? I don't even go to school anymore. Why would I care if they're serving prison food? The leftovers from the prison. Doesn't matter. A church revolution calls you to give up your life and to live a new life in Christ. See, it's not very demanding at all. It only demands everything. Ouch. Where do you stand? Where are you at? How long are you willing to wait? Is this about your life? Is this about who we are as revolutionaries for Jesus Christ? Or is this about right now, right here, right this second? You see, that's the problem with the group that's gathered there. The 5,000 are gathered around, and they want the right now, the immediate, when in fact what they really need is to see what God is doing in their midst. I'd love to be able to say that I'd be one of the people that gets Jesus' lesson first off. But I'm probably just as dense as a bunch of them. I want to be a part of the church revolution, not the church uprising. I want to be part of the long-term, eternal effect, not part of the what can we do for this immediate moment. I want to constantly be moving toward God and realizing that whatever results come out of the ministry that happens here in this place as we are all a part of, but the results are ultimately left up to Jesus and not to us. Where do you stand? Where do you want to be? Are you ready for a revolution? Heavenly Father, this morning, as we close up our time together, I thank you so much for this story. The one that sort of lays bare that you can be a part of a miracle and still misunderstand who Jesus is. That you can be a part of a church and still not understand what the church should be taking as most sacred. That you can find that you've lost your way before you've even realized that you're not on the right path. So this morning, Lord, I guess there's several things that we need to pray for. First off, if there's anybody that still hasn't taken the step on the journey with you, may today be the day that they say, yes, I will trade my life in and live for God. I will be reconciled to you. I will be redeemed. May this also be the day that anyone who's wandered away from you and realizes that as I've been speaking, they fit a lot of the uprising and not enough of the revolution, that they return to you and that their face would be looking at yours. For any of us who need to recognize that this is more than just a momentary thing, but it's an eternal consequence, help us to find the right way. As a congregation, Lord, even as a congregation that is scattered about not only this city, but around the country, help us to continue to minister in ways that you only are glorified. Heavenly Father, we love you. we thank you. We ask your continued protection among us. Be with each need of each person that's hearing this prayer. And most importantly, keep us safe so that we can once again worship you together. Again, we love you. We thank you. We give you all the glory, all the honor, all the praise. And we thank you so much for spending this time with us as we've concentrated on you. In Jesus' name, all God's people said.
Thanks for watching this sermon with me. If you enjoyed your time with us, we'd invite you to join us in person for a service. Visit us at desertgrace.org or give us a call at 928-305-1132 for more information.